courage and determination, sacrifice marked the beginning and the end of tyranny and oppression in Europe. As we gather here 80 years later, we remember those who gave their lives for the cause of freedom. Their legacy is not only preserved in the annals of history, but also for peace and liberty we enjoy today. It is our duty to ensure that their sacrifices are never forgotten and that the lessons of D-Day continue to inspire and guide us. Today we honour the veterans who fought on those fateful beaches, especially their families who support them, and all those who have dedicated their lives in pursuit of justice and peace. We also extend our deepest gratitude to current members of our armed forces who continue to uphold the values from which many fought and died. As we reflect on their bravery and resilience of those who participated in D-Day, let us also commit ourselves to fostering a world where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. May their courage remind us the strength we pose, uniting common cause, and may their legacy inspire us to strive for a more just and peaceful world.
This reading is taken from John chapter 15, verses 12 to 14. My command is this love. Love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Earlier just last month actually, it was my privilege to meet a gentleman who's with us here today, Mr. Wladyslaw Nazar, or Walter, as he's known. Walter is a Kirkby great-grandfather who fought the Nazis after being forced from his home and used as a slave during the Second World War. Today, we're both humbled and privileged that Walter and his dear wife Judy are here today as part of our commemorations for D-Day 80. Walter's story is remarkable and illustrates that even today, 80 years later, the legacy of the Second World War and the impact it had on those who lived through it still resonates. Walter was only 12 years old when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, triggering the start of the Second World War. He was taken from his home in Poland by Nazi troops and used as slave labour in Germany and France. Forced to work in an ammunition factory and then as a farm labourer, he was then moved to occupied France. There he helped build some of the concrete bunkers used by German soldiers in their battles with Allied forces who landed on the beaches of Normandy 80 years ago today to liberate Western Europe. After escaping his captors, Walter joined local partisans attacking German patrols before joining an American combat division where he was an ammunition carrier and later an interpreter for POWs. Walter is now 97 years old and has lived in Kirkby for more than 70 years. He remembers vividly still the day he was forcibly taken from his hometown, changing his life forever. Walter describes that moment. He said, "My mother sent me to buy some yeast from the town, but German lorries pulled up and I was taken with other boys and old men. They took us to a railway station and they put us on trains to Germany, to a slave camp. We were treated terribly, had very little to eat and slept on straw. I was living with Russian and French prisoners of war." After working in the German ammunition factory in Nuremberg, Walter worked as a farmhand until he was then taken to France. He said, "We had to build the bunkers. I would put metre-long steel rods in before the concrete." He was one of 8 slave labourers who managed to escape, joining up with local partisan fighters in France. He describes what they did. "We were demolishing railway lines at night and hunting the Germans. They were hunting us. We needed their weapons and supplies. One day we heard tanks. We were worried about this, but it was the American army. American troops took Walter under their wing, and though he was still only a teenage boy, he joined the 1258th Combat Engineer Battalion, Company B, as the Allies fought their way through France and then into Germany. It was there he became close with a Master Sergeant named Bill Mackay. He was originally from Scotland. He asked Walter to return to the United States with him once the war had ended and start a new life there in the States. But sadly, a few days later, Bill was shot and killed by a fanatic from the Hitler Youth. It was very sad, recalls Walter. When the war ended in May 1945, Walter remained with the US forces in Nuremberg around the time of the war crimes trials of Nazi leaders. Eventually, he came to Britain with other Eastern European exiles, unable to go back home because of the rise of communism and the Iron Curtain. Walter spent some time in Cambridge before moving to Nottingham, where he met Judy in 1953. The couple have been married for 66 years. They have 4 children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He spent the rest of his life working in mining. In the 60s, he was able to return home to Poland, where he was reunited with his mother and other family members, who he was able to keep in touch with. Walter has never had any official recognition for his wartime exploits, on account of being underage, not having any official documentation of his time with the American forces, other than the old photographs that show him in an American military uniform with his company. What he witnessed as a young boy has stayed with him forever. Judy has told me that Walter still has nightmares about it today, all these years later. Walter told me, it's a cruel world. When I think of what happened to so many people, especially the women and children, it still comes to me at night time. It goes round and round in my head. You can't forget that. You just can't.
Good morning, friends. It's always an immense honour and privilege for me to take part in commemoration events such as this one. And as leader of the council, I get that great privilege. But as we just heard from Kevin, there was 18,000 paratroopers landing that day, and one of them was my little granddad, who is here today, who is 100 in 30 days, and has not been out for 6 weeks, and we just lost my grandmother. So and he really wants to be out today, so thank you for coming, Granddad. Sherwin Canada was one of the first to arrive at Utah Beach and helped to take troops to shore on D-Day. They say we're heroes, but we're not heroes. We had a job to do and we did it. We did it to the best of our abilities. We weren't brave, we were scared. And when you're scared, you do almost anything. Calendar goes on to say that he prayed every time he heard a bullet or a bomb blast. I'd say, dear Lord, I know you have to kill some of us. Kill me if you have to, but please do not send me home a cripple. And my prayers were answered.
Now that's my father, Joe Bennett. He's 20 at the time. He was a stoker first class on HMS Keppel, which was a destroyer. Before D-Day, he was on the Russian convoys. And what he hasn't said in what I'm about to say is that he was at Omaha Beach with the Americans, and he said when he came up from the engine rooms and up onto the deck, he said the smell of cordite was incredibly heavy in the air, and the noise from the bombers overhead, the planes, the shelling was absolutely deafening. So perhaps as I read this, you might sort of remember some of that. So we start on the 5th of June. We came up the Solent and anchored off the Isle of Wight. Ships and landing craft were everywhere you looked, hundreds of them. Looked like another big exercise, someone suggested, and the general view was that this would be the real thing. 6th of June. Early morning, on the tanker in Portsmouth Harbour to fill up. And while we were taking the oil on board ships and landing craft were making their way out, the quartermaster piped, "Clear lower decks, muster on the upper deck." Up we went. The captain was Commander Tyson. He arrived with the officers. He gave us the news that Allied landings in Normandy had just begun, and the first soldiers were about to land on the beach. And it was D-Day, the long-awaited second front. HMS Keppel, he told us, would be leaving immediately for the beachhead. In addition to being fully clothed clothed at all times, which was normal practice. Life belts would also be worn at all times, and that was normal practice. We were ordered to change at once into clean underwear and overalls, and to minimise infection from shrapnel wounds. Also, we were told to put on our anti-flash gauntlets and hoods, and anyone not wearing them would be put under punishment. The anti-flash gear must not be removed until further orders. Heavy casualties must be expected in this operation. He then wished the crew good luck in the days ahead. Oiling completed, we left the tanker, and with hundreds of other vessels of all types, we headed out into the English Channel on the way to France. I don't suppose I was alone in thinking, well, what's going to happen now? Everyone, especially the soldiers on the landing craft, would, without doubt, have the very same thought. There was, after all, a sense of security in numbers. Why would the Germans attack our destroyer when there were more tempting targets around? The passage across the short stretch of water was relatively uneventful, thanks mostly to a sky full of Allied fighter planes. We did drop one depth charge on an unidentified underwater object, but nothing happened. And prior to sailing, an Austrian coder had been posted to the ship. He was an expert on German naval signals and codes. He was soon at work, raising the alarm that German E-boats were coming down from the harbour to attack a certain sector, and the Allied ships were warned of the impending attack, and the E-boats received a hot reception. 7th of June. It was less than 24 hours since the first soldiers had landed. Battleships and cruisers lying offshore were busy pounding away. Destroyers, closer still, added their contribution. As the landing craft continued ferrying the soldiers ashore, the Canadians and British were to our left and the Americans to our right. Keppel was close to the USS Texas, an American battleship, 2 cruisers of the French Free Navy, the Montcalm and the Georges Legge, HMS Glasgow and a dozen Allied destroyers all busy blasting away. It was Omaha beachhead and the Americans had suffered heavy losses of soldiers and landing craft. Bodies occasionally floated past on the tide. They hadn't even reached the beach. A crowd of us stood up on deck watching all the activity. My mate Bill Cole was next to me. "Well, what do you reckon to this lot, Bill?" His answer was slow in coming, and then he said, "Well, it's better than going to Russia, isn't it?" I looked at the landing craft laden with the soldiers going towards the beach and the turmoil ashore. "Oh, I bet they don't think so, Bill." "Well," he replied, "if we do get sunk, there's loads of ships to pick us up, and the beach isn't far away." There was a huge explosion on the beach. Joe must have hit some ammunition or petrol. Flames and smoke flew skywards. A few shells splashed into the sea nearby. It appeared that the firing was haphazard, so I would just fire away and hope to hit something. Why, after all, aim at Keppel when the huge Texas was there? One shell did fall uncomfortably close, but it did no damage and caused the only casualty on Keppel, a signalman hit on the wrist by a bit of shrapnel. By late afternoon, tugs began to arrive towing huge concrete sections. No one had any idea what they could be. They were, as we found out later, the Mulberry Harbours being brought into position. There was one in the American sector and one for the British and Canadians, and they were one of the war's best kept secrets.
Remembrance is a time when we all recall those who gave themselves for us to remember why it was. They did what they did. Some people suggest that remembrance glorifies war. But that misses the point altogether. It is time to remember